At my brother's Christmas Eve dinner, his 10-year-old son grabbed a full glass of red wine and poured it over my head while the entire family watched. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mom says you smell like the hospital anyway." The table erupted in laughter. My sister-in-law raised her glass in a mock toast. My mother shook her head and told me I should have worn something that was not white. I sat there, Merlot dripping down my face, staining my blouse, pooling in the creases of my neck. I did not say a word. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the freezing Atlanta night. That evening, my brother Marcus texted me. "Stop being dramatic. Nobody forced you to wear white to a dinner party. Grow up and apologize to Aiden for making him cry when you stormed out." I read it twice. Then I typed back 4 words. "Check your lease, Marcus." By morning, his landlord was calling. Before I go any further, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the quiet one in the family who finally decided to stop being quiet. My name is Renee, and I am 31 years old. For the last 6 years, my family has believed I am a night shift nurse at a community clinic on the east side of Atlanta, making $42,000 a year. They see my 10-year-old Honda Civic with the dented bumper. They see my scrubs from the discount medical supply store. They see my studio apartment in a neighborhood where you hear sirens more than birdsong. What they do not see is the private medical investment group I built from nothing. They do not see that I own controlling shares in 3 urgent care clinics across the metro area and a surgical center in Buckhead that generates 7 figures annually. They certainly do not see that 18 months ago, when my brother Marcus and his wife Diane were rejected by every bank in Georgia for a commercial property lease, I was the silent partner behind the investment firm that approved their application. I created this distance on purpose. When our father died of a heart attack 6 years ago, I watched my family fight over his old pickup truck before his body was even cold. I watched my mother Loretta give Marcus the house and tell me I could have the toaster oven because nurses do not need much space. I decided then that I needed to know who loved me and who loved what I could provide. So I disappeared into the background of my own family. I became invisible, and invisible people see everything. I pulled my battered Honda into the circular driveway of Marcus and Diane's rented brownstone in Midtown that Thursday evening. It was a gorgeous property, 4 stories of exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Piedmont Park. The kind of place that whispers old money even though the people inside were drowning in new debt. I parked at the end of the block because last year Diane had asked me not to park near the house. She said my car brought down the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I walked up the stone steps carrying a homemade sweet potato pie and a bottle of wine I had chosen carefully, a reserve Pinot Noir that cost more than my monthly fake rent. I rang the doorbell. Marcus opened the door. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that still had the Nordstrom tag tucked inside the collar. He looked past me like he was expecting someone more important to arrive behind me. "You're late," he said. "Not hello, not Merry Christmas, just criticism." Diane already started the appetizers. "Here." He shoved a stack of wrapped gifts into my arms. "Put these under the tree upstairs. The living room is full, so use the guest bedroom. And be careful with the red box. That's a Cartier bracelet for Diane. It costs more than your car." I stood there holding strangers' presents, staring at the brother I used to build pillow forts with. Marcus had married Diane 4 years ago. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep who treated money like oxygen, essential and never enough. Together, they had constructed a life that looked stunning from the outside but was held together with credit card statements and delusion. I carried the gifts upstairs. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked plain. That was the point. I told myself I could survive 4 hours of this. I was wrong. When I came back downstairs, the dining room was a performance. My mother Loretta sat at the head of the table wearing a fur-trimmed shawl she had bought on a payment plan, holding court with a glass of champagne that was mostly foam. Diane was next to her, glowing in a sequined dress, adjusting the centerpiece for the 3rd time so it would photograph well for her lifestyle blog. Marcus was pouring drinks and laughing too loudly at his own jokes. The air smelled like rosemary and roasted lamb, but underneath it I could smell the desperation. I noticed things nobody else caught. I saw the past due notice from Georgia Power tucked under a magazine on the kitchen counter. I saw the way Diane's eyes darted to her phone every few minutes, probably checking if her credit card payment had posted. I saw that Marcus was wearing a watch with a dead battery, the hands frozen at 3:15, but he kept glancing at his wrist anyway because the watch looked expensive. There was no place set for me at the main table. "Oh, Renee," Diane said, barely looking up from her phone. "We ran out of chairs. You don't mind sitting with Aiden, right? He's been impossible all day and I need someone to keep him from breaking things." She gestured toward a folding card table crammed between the kitchen doorway and the recycling bin. My mother chimed in without hesitation. "It makes sense, Renee. You're used to long shifts on your feet. A little discomfort won't kill you. Besides, Aiden adores his auntie." I looked at the main table. There were 2 empty chairs. They just did not want me in the frame of the Christmas photo Diane was planning to post at exactly midnight. I moved my plate to the card table where my 10-year-old nephew Aiden was playing a game on his tablet with the volume at maximum. "Sit down," Aiden commanded without looking up. "And get me another soda. The one in the fridge, not the flat one." "Aiden," I said calmly. "We ask nicely. And maybe we should put the tablet away during dinner." He finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, rehearsed, a mirror of his mother's contempt. It was the look of a child who had been taught exactly how much I was worth. "Mom says I don't have to listen to you," he announced, loud enough for the whole room to hear. The conversation at the main table paused. "She says you're just a nurse who wipes butts for a living. Nurses take orders. They don't give them." Nobody corrected him. Marcus snorted into his wine glass. Diane covered her mouth, pretending to cough, but I could see the smirk behind her fingers. My mother sighed and said, "Renee, don't make a scene. He's just a child being honest." Honest. My mother called her grandson's cruelty honesty. I turned back to Aiden, who had picked up his glass of red wine. It was not his glass. He had reached across to my place setting and grabbed the wine I had poured for myself. "Aiden, put that down," I said firmly. His response was immediate and deliberate. He stood up on his chair, lifted the glass above my head, and poured the entire thing over me. The cold red liquid hit my scalp first, then cascaded down my face, my neck, into my blouse. I gasped. The wine burned my eyes and stained everything it touched. The white silk top I had splurged on for the occasion turned a violent shade of crimson. Time slowed down. I heard the wine dripping onto the hardwood floor. I heard my own breathing, and then I heard the laughter. It started with Aiden, a high-pitched cackle of a child who knows he will never face consequences. Then Marcus joined in, a deep belly laugh that shook his shoulders. Diane clapped her hands together like she was watching a comedy special. Even my mother chuckled, shaking her head. "Lord have mercy," Loretta said, dabbing her eyes. "Renee, you look like a crime scene. Go clean yourself up in the bathroom before you ruin Diane's floors. Those are Brazilian cherry hardwood." I sat there, wine soaking through my clothes, staring at 4 people who shared my blood. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one of them told Aiden to apologize. My sister-in-law was already reaching for her phone to take a photo. "Oh my God," Diane giggled. "This is going on the blog. Renee, hold still. The lighting is perfect." Something inside me severed. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was the quiet, final click of a lock turning shut. The cord that had tethered me to this family for 31 years simply dissolved. I stood up. The wine dripped from my chin onto the floor. I did not wipe my face. I let them see the mess they made. "I am leaving," I said. My voice was calm, almost clinical. Marcus rolled his eyes. "Good. Go back to your little apartment. Maybe next Christmas you'll learn to take a joke. Don't expect leftovers." I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard silverware clinking. They had already resumed eating before I reached the hallway. I stepped into the December night. The cold air hit my wine-soaked skin like a slap. I walked past my decoy Honda, 3 blocks down to the private parking garage where my white Porsche Cayenne sat waiting under a dust cover. I peeled off the cover, climbed into the heated leather seat, and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face was stained purple. My eyes were dry. I picked up my phone and opened my secure banking app. Then, I called my attorney. "Victoria," I said, "activate the lease recall on the Midtown property. Full balance, immediate default." "Merry Christmas to you too," Victoria replied. "Are you sure?" "That's a 7-figure recall. I am sure." "And Victoria?" "Start drafting a defamation complaint. I have a feeling I'm going to need it by morning. I drove to my real home, a renovated loft on the top floor of a converted warehouse in the old Fourth Ward. It was a space I had designed myself, with exposed beams, a wall of windows facing the Atlanta skyline, and a kitchen that would make a chef weep. I poured myself a glass of champagne, real champagne, not the grocery store sparkling wine Marcus had served. I sat at my desk and pulled up the file. 18 months ago, Marcus and Diane had wanted to open a boutique fitness studio in Midtown. The banks turned them down because Marcus had a credit score that belonged in a dumpster. His private equity side hustle had produced nothing but losses, and Diane's spending habits had maxed out 6 credit cards. They were desperate. That is when Pinnacle Capital Partners stepped in. Pinnacle was my company, a boutique investment firm that specialized in commercial property leases for high-risk tenants. I had written the lease agreement myself. Every clause, every comma, every escape hatch. Marcus signed it without reading past the first page because he saw the money and his ego would not let him slow down. I opened the lease agreement on my center monitor and scrolled to Section 11, Paragraph C, the Conduct and Reputation Clause. It stated that if the tenant or any household member of the tenant engages in conduct that results in physical harm, harassment, or reputational damage to the lessor or its designated representatives, the lessor may accelerate the lease and demand full repayment of all outstanding obligations within 72 hours. I touched my wine-stained hair. Physical harm through a deliberate act on the lessor's property, committed by a resident of the property. I screenshot the text from Marcus demanding I apologize to his son. Reputational damage. They had insulted the person who held their lease, to her face, in her own property. I clicked the default button. The system generated automatic notifications to the credit bureaus, the property management company, and Marcus's bank. An automated call was scheduled to ring his phone every 20 minutes until the balance was resolved. I leaned back and watched the data cascade across the screen. By morning, their business accounts would be frozen, their credit lines would be suspended, and they would discover that the sister they called a butt wiper was the woman who owned the building they slept in. The next morning played out exactly as I expected. Marcus tried to buy his morning espresso from the artisan coffee shop down the street. Declined. He tried his backup card. Declined. He called his bank in a panic and was told his accounts were frozen per a directive from his primary creditor, Pinnacle Capital Partners. He did not connect the dots immediately. He assumed it was a computer error. But Diane, who was sharper than she pretended to be, remembered something. She pulled up the text I had sent the night before. "Check your lease, Marcus." She stared at it for 10 seconds. Then she ran to the filing cabinet and pulled out the lease agreement. She flipped to the cover page and saw the logo of Pinnacle Capital Partners. She typed the name into a search engine and found the registered agent, RW Holdings LLC, RW, Renee Walker. Diane dropped the papers. Her hands were shaking. She screamed for Marcus. When she showed him what she had found, he laughed. He actually laughed. "That's impossible," he said. "Renee makes 40 grand a year. She drives a Honda with duct tape on the mirror. She can't be Pinnacle." But the pieces were fitting together, and denial can only hold for so long. They showed up at my office at noon. I had told my receptionist to let them up. I wanted them to see the truth with their own eyes. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a space that did not match their understanding of who I was. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Centennial Olympic Park, Italian leather furniture, original artwork on the walls, and me, sitting behind a desk that cost more than their fitness studio's entire inventory, wearing a tailored charcoal suit with my hair pulled back in a clean bun. The wine-stained girl from last night was gone. "What is this?" Marcus breathed, looking around with his mouth open. "This is Pinnacle Capital Partners," I said, not standing up. "My company. Welcome to my office. Please don't touch the sculpture near the door. It's worth more than your watch collection." Diane found her voice first. "You've been lying to us. You've been pretending to be poor while you sat on millions. You watched us struggle and you did nothing." "I watched you spend," I corrected her. "There is a difference between struggling and hemorrhaging money on things you cannot afford." And I did not lie. "I simply never told you, and you never asked." Not once in 6 years did anyone in this family ask me how I was doing, what I was building, or whether I was happy. You asked me to hold coats. You asked me to babysit. You asked me to sit at the kids' table. But you never asked me about my life. Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tight. This is insane. You can't just take our home because a kid spilled some wine. He did not spill wine, Marcus. He poured it on my head while your wife laughed, your mother watched, and you did nothing. That is assault on the lessor's representative, committed on the lessor's property, by a resident of the property. Section 11, paragraph C. I picked up the remote and projected the lease agreement onto the wall behind me. The conduct clause was highlighted in yellow, 8 feet tall. You signed this 18 months ago. You were so desperate to impress Diane with a Midtown address that you didn't even have a lawyer look at it. You just saw the money and signed. Marcus stared at his own signature projected on the wall. His face went gray. My mother, Loretta, was the last to arrive. She came 2 hours later, clutching her Bible and a photo album. She had clearly been coached by Diane. She walked into my office and looked around with wide eyes that flickered between shock and greed. "Renee, baby," she said, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "Why are you doing this to your brother? The Lord says we must forgive. Family is everything. You have so much. Look at this office. Why do you need to take from Marcus when you already have more than enough?" I looked at her. My mother, who gave Marcus the house when Dad died and gave me a toaster oven. My mother, who told me nursing was a fine career for a girl who was not pretty enough to marry rich. "Sit down, Mother," I said. She sat. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder. "Do you remember when Dad was in the hospital?" I asked. "Those last 3 months. The private room. The specialist from Emory. The experimental medication that insurance wouldn't cover." Loretta nodded slowly. "Marcus paid for all of that. He told us he handled it." "Marcus did not pay for a single aspirin," I said. I slid the folder across the desk. Inside were wire transfer receipts, every payment to Piedmont Hospital, to the oncology team, to the hospice, to the funeral home. Every single one came from RW Holdings. From me. My mother stared at the papers. She flipped through them, looking for Marcus's name. It was nowhere. "I paid for Dad's treatment," I said, and my voice cracked for just a moment before I steadied it. "I paid for the private room so he could see the trees outside his window. I paid for the funeral. I paid for the headstone you picked out. Marcus told you he handled it because it made him look like the hero. And I let him, because I didn't want Dad spending his last days worrying about money." Loretta looked up at me. I watched her face, waiting for the recognition, the apology, the tears of remorse. Instead, her expression hardened. "If you had all this money," she said, her voice turning sharp, "why didn't you share it? Why did you let me clip coupons? Why did you let Marcus stress about his business? You're selfish, Renee. You always were." I felt the last thread snap. She was not going to change. She had chosen her narrative, and no amount of evidence would rewrite it. "Goodbye, Mother," I said, opening the office door. "I'm not selfish. I'm done." She left without another word. The next 72 hours were chaos. Marcus hired a lawyer who sent me a threatening letter calling my lease predatory and demanding I release the property. My legal team responded with a 40-page filing that included Marcus's falsified income statements from the original lease application. He had claimed an annual income of $400,000. His actual income that year was $61,000. That is lease fraud, and in Georgia, it carries serious criminal penalties. Diane went live on Instagram, crying into her ring light, telling her followers that her mentally unstable sister-in-law was trying to steal their home out of jealousy. She painted herself as the victim and me as the villain. Her followers rallied. The hashtags started trending. But I had been recording her defamatory statements. Every lie she told was time-stamped and archived. I filed a defamation suit for $2 million and had the process server deliver it while she was filming a sponsored post for a teeth whitening brand. The brand dropped her within the hour. Marcus, desperate and drunk, tried everything. He called a hard money lender who laughed him out of the room. He hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. The PI called him back the next day and said I was the cleanest person he had ever investigated. No debt, no scandal, no vices. She reads books and volunteers at a free clinic on Saturdays, the PI told him. You're wasting your money. Marcus tried to forge the lease documents, whiting out Pinnacle's name and replacing it with his own. He actually tried to convince himself that a county clerk would not notice. I forwarded the forged documents to the district attorney. On eviction day, I arrived at the brownstone at 8 in the morning with a sheriff's deputy, a locksmith, and a moving crew. Marcus opened the door, looking like he had not slept in days. He was holding his forged documents, waving them like a flag of surrender. "This is my property," he screamed. "I have the deed. Look at the deed." The sheriff did not even glance at the papers. Marcus saw me standing behind the officers and charged. He got 3 steps before my security detail put him on the ground. The handcuffs clicked shut. "Marcus Davis," the sheriff said, "you are under arrest for assault, resisting a lawful eviction, and presentation of forged documents to law enforcement." They led him to the cruiser. Diane was found in the master bedroom, surrounded by half-packed boxes of designer shoes. She did not fight. She just stared at me with hollow eyes and whispered, "Where are we supposed to go?" "I don't know, Diane," I said. "Maybe you should ask the followers you lied to." Then I went to find Aiden. He was in his room, sitting on his bed with headphones on, staring at a blank screen. He looked small. He looked scared. "Are you going to send me to jail too?" he asked. "No, Aiden," I said, kneeling down to his level. "Children don't go to jail for their parents' mistakes. Your grandmother is downstairs in a taxi. She's going to take you to get waffles." I took his hand and walked him past the movers, past his mother's tears, past his father in the back of the police car. I put him in the taxi with my mother, who would not meet my eyes. "Take care of him," I said, "and tell him the truth. Don't let him grow up thinking the world owes him something." I closed the door and watched the cab disappear down the tree-lined street. 6 months later, Marcus is serving 18 months in a federal facility for wire fraud. The forensic accountants found much more than a falsified lease application. They uncovered a network of shell companies he had used to hide losses from investors in his failed side ventures. Diane lost everything: the brownstone, the cars, the credit lines. She ended up in a 1-bedroom apartment near the airport where the walls shake every time a plane takes off. She applied for a sales position at the department store she used to shop in. The manager pulled up the viral video of her eviction and told her they could not have that kind of exposure representing their brand. She works the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse now, scanning packages in a fluorescent-lit room that smells like cardboard. I set up an anonymous education trust for Aiden. He will receive it when he turns 21, on the condition that he completes therapy and maintains a GPA above 3. He did not choose his parents. He does not deserve to carry their debt. My mother, Loretta, stopped going to church after the congregation turned cold. The pastor who once praised her family's generosity now preaches about pride and false idols while looking directly at her pew. She sold her jewelry, piece by piece, to help Diane pay rent. The woman who gave me a toaster oven is now selling her pearls to survive. I spent my Christmas Eve this year at the community center on the east side of Atlanta. I started a nonprofit called Second Chance Health. We provide free medical checkups and financial literacy workshops for single mothers and their children. I stood at the front of the room that evening, looking at 40 faces. Women who work double shifts, kids who wear second-hand coats. They do not have brownstones or cashmere sweaters, but they have something my family never had: gratitude. I drove home as the sun set, painting the Atlanta skyline in deep amber and violet. I stopped at the farmer's market and bought a small organic turkey breast, fresh cranberries, and a bottle of the best champagne they carried. It is Christmas Eve, and I am cooking for one. I set my table. It is a solid walnut table that seats 8, but tonight there is one place setting. I lit a candle. I put on some jazz. And then I went to the drawer and took out my silverware. Real silver, heavy and cool against my palm. I picked up my wine glass and held it up to the light. It was full of Pinot Noir, the same varietal that had been poured over my head exactly 1 year ago. But this glass was mine. I earned it. I poured it myself, and nobody was ever going to pour it on me again. I sat down at the head of my own table. There was no laughter at my expense. No folding card table by the recycling bin. No child calling me a servant. No mother telling me to clean myself up. Just silence. Beautiful, earned, expensive silence. They used to tell me I was nothing. They used to tell me I should be grateful for the scraps they tossed from their table. They mistook my quiet for weakness. They confused my patience with submission. They thought they could use me and discard me because I was just the nurse. I cut a piece of turkey with my silver knife and speared it with my silver fork. I took a bite. It tasted like freedom. They were right about one thing, though. I was the help. I helped them face the truth they had been running from for years. I helped them understand that actions have consequences. I helped them see that the quiet girl in the scrubs was the one signing their checks the entire time. And the price of that service was everything they had. I raised my glass to the empty room, to the silence, to the peace, to the little girl who was given a toaster oven and told she did not need much. "Merry Christmas, Renee," I whispered. "The story is over, the debt is paid, and I am finally free." This story reminds us that respect is not a suggestion, it is a requirement. Marcus and Diane built their lives on borrowed money and borrowed arrogance, believing that image could replace integrity. They mistook Renee's silence for submission, forgetting that the person who holds the lease holds the power. The deepest lesson here is simple. You cannot demand loyalty from the people you disrespect, and family is not a title, it is a behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from the people who only love what you can give them. If you have ever had to build your own table because you were denied a seat at theirs, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and quiet strength. Share your own story of setting boundaries in the comments below. I read every single one.